Hey, I know it's dark right now, but it's just barely 6 a.m. I'm finally getting some reviews out of the way. And so this video is a review about A Question of Doubt by John Wayne Gacy. So, as always, this review is my opinion. To preface, the book I read was an incomplete version. If anyone has a copy that's uploaded in full, let me know. Just send me an email. I found my version of A Question of Doubt floating around on the internet. I don't know who uploaded it, let alone why. It's not the whole book, but I just attribute that to a human error. That said, of course, let's talk about the book itself. If you followed this channel, you might have listened to me read the book on, here in video. But anyway, John Wayne Gacy wrote this book while he was in prison, not long before his execution in 1994. The first, if not only, edition is dated 1993, copyrights dating 1988 and 1993. Not much seems to be known about the background of the story, like what was the making of, what was the mentality, why did he decide to be like, yeah, sure, let me write a book. I don't have any information on that. I'm sure some of his correspondence when he was still alive can tell me. But anyway, I just can't help but think, of course. I mean, why? Why did he write the book? Oh, why did he think it was a good idea? Why didn't he just tell the truth as one last tell all before being executed? Of course, the answer is that we don't know. In general, a lot of the questions you'd ask about this book could only be answered with, I don't know. John Wayne Gacy was a serial killer convicted for the murders of multiple people, a majority of whom were found deceased under his house. Even to this day, which is right now July of 2024, there are still people, I believe 5 more people, who are yet to be identified that were found under the crawl space of Gacy's home. Gacy, in various accounts, confessed to the murders, then denied them, then sort of confessed again, and then denied them again. At least in the last few years of his life, he denied the murders were his doing. Sort of. There are videos documenting that he admitted to some of the murders, at least of Timothy McCoy, that I could think of off the top of my head, where he claimed that he killed McCoy out of self-defense. The video I think of in particular is the, I believe, FBI interview with Gacy where he had said that. A Question of Doubt is a written extension of his denial. For whatever reason, Gacy decided to make a written account of his denial to the crimes. And it's a strange thing to do. If he was truly innocent, why would he write a whole book proving it? The answer, I don't know. Probably narcissism. Having read through the book myself, it's obvious to me that Gacy wanted to gloat about his crimes. In a roundabout way, the book allowed him to go back and talk about it all, with the exception, of course, of the actual murders, and then gloat about everything. Gacy gloated about how much of a successful businessman he was. He used the book as a way to relish in his ways of having been able to thwart the police around Chicago. It was like the book allowed him to relive that time. Majority of the book before the trial focused on the dates around the time that Robert Peast went missing and what happened not long after. Gacy wrote of Peast like as if he were some meddling kid with the mystery gang. It seems that Gacy really had the mentality that he would have gotten away with it if it weren't for Robert Peast. And you could tell that Gacy always thought of Peast as his downfall. Probably an error that never left his mind. Of course, throughout the book, Gacy never admitted to killing Peast. He acted like he didn't know the kid, like as if he never met Robert. Gacy's tactic of feigning ignorance was something that he used while writing the book and during the trials. It seems that Gacy really thought that he could act this way and no one would question him. But it's so clear, even in writing, that this was a ruse. So completely fake, I'd be surprised if somebody actually believed it. The tone of Gacy's writing comes off as an incredulous baby boomer that is offended someone would accuse them of something. Truly a narcissistic person, textbook, in the way that he refused any accountability and could not take any blame. He refused to acknowledge that he was the problem. Any time there was an issue, Gacy would point the finger at other people, saying, "It's not me, it's you." I assume that this mentality is how Gacy went through most of his life, playing the victim to manipulate others into feeling bad. And the book starts out with, "This book was written with the intent to show that there was always more than one side to a story, whether that story is detailed over a backyard fence by neighbors in the form that is referred to as gossip, or if it is the slanted version of a war correspondent debasing the efforts of one country and hailing the valiant rightness of another, or if the story is the account of a trial in a courtroom of American justice." Immediately, it starts with a dose of narcissism that is supposed to make the reader question the veracity of the investigation that was done on him and the prosecution's case against him. It then goes on to say that Gacy was at one point a civic community leader, an influential businessman, politician, mass killer, and news media monster. It's like he really had to gloat about the things he had done and was once known as. It was like another point of pride for him. The book as a whole is written like Gacy was a character from a sitcom and not like these were real life situations that were depicted. Like as if this was a situation taken out of context. It was like everything was blown out of proportion. If you managed to read this book, yet hear nothing else about John Wayne Gacy's case, you'd probably think that none of the crimes were very serious. Basically, to me, it was like as if Gacy he wrote the story like as if he got a traffic ticket, and not the fact that he managed to take 33 instances of human life. It was just a traffic ticket to him. You'd easily forget that Gacy was sent to death row for murdering multiple young men. Maybe in some way that was what Gacy wanted. To be remembered at the end of the day. To be what people thought about when reading about this case. He seemingly had to stay in the limelight, overshadowing the victims in yet another way. It's already hard enough for people to think of the victims that were murdered in true crime cases. Very often we remember the murderers, as obviously with John Wayne Gacy. More so than we remember the names of people like John Zick and Gregory Godzik. Gacy tried to throw doubt as to whether he was the real killer, a theme that was recurrent throughout the whole book, and something that he would talk about in the interviews before his death. This is a topic I actually do find intriguing, to a point. Do I believe that Gacy was the mass killer as he was accused of being? Yes, I do. But I won't lie, I actually do believe that he had help. I do. I believe he had help. This is a topic that was slightly hinted at in the book, and a question that he would ask in the final years of his life. Another thing I remember from the FBI interview with him. I want to make a video about this topic later, but I'll just say here that I will absolutely say there was no possible way To me, no possible way Gacy killed all of those people completely alone. I believe in the book itself, it questioned it out. He said that some of the deaths or crimes were like double murders. And of course, if you go beyond the book, I mean, so many different documentaries on John Wayne Gacy will tell you there were double and triple murders. So to me, I kind of think, okay, there had to have been more than one person doing this with him. There's been a lot of talk in the years since the crimes. I feel like, especially now in this millennium, uh, I feel like a lot. I feel like a lot of people talk about it more so in the 21st century now that Rossi and Cram had to, a lot of people believe, like I do, that Rossi and Cram absolutely, without a doubt, helped lure, kill, and knowingly bury at least some, if not all of these victims. Well, not every single one, like Timothy, but you still understand what I mean. The preface then ends with Gacy claiming that he was the 34th victim due to the ways that he was mistreated by the legal system. And it's such a joke. It's highly narcissistic for him to have written that. How could he possibly be seen as a victim in any part of this case when there were at least 33 mothers that were forever without their sons? 33 different families finding out one way or another that their missing children would never come home. Gacy tried to claim at points that he had no idea that all the bodies were buried underneath the house. It was like as if some mystery murderer kept placing bodies under the home unknown to him. Of course, he also claimed to have killed Timothy McCoy in self-defense. Teen, mind you. I believe Timothy was 17 at the time. To, of course, John being middle-aged. Or it was 1972, so John would have been about 30, but still, twice his age, almost. Once again, to me, I'm just like, what's the truth? What's the truth, John? Was it all by a mystery murderer, or was it by you? You killed Timothy, but the rest are a mystery? It doesn't make sense. There are still victims who do not have their names. Like I said before, there's about 5 other people who have still not been identified. If anyone was to be the 34th victim, shouldn't it have been at least a family member to one of these people killed? The only victims are the deceased and their families. Gacy could have done one good thing in his life post-conviction, yet he chose not to do so. In the least, he could have written the truth about all of the crimes. He could have even admitted to even some of it. Because either way, he was gonna die. Yet this didn't happen. The writing itself is surprisingly good at times. Definitely better than some of the books by the Manson family. If Gacy wasn't a serial killer, I think that he actually could have been a pretty good journalist or writer. Of course. But then again, thinking of it now, of course he was such a good writer, writing about himself. Of course, while talking about himself, Gacy lied frequently. To me, it was the same way that Susan Atkins lied in her book, where it wasn't blatant, flat out lies, like not over the top crazy shit, but Gacy and Susan Atkins, they lied by omission. That's how a lot of their lies worked. They lied by omission, in which there were holes in their story about their whereabouts. Well, of course, especially with Gacy, holes in his story, where he was at, and in between this job and that job, He also just would simply, he just didn't talk about going out and kidnapping people, among the, other things that he didn't do. It is ironic. I think of it now. I didn't write this down, but he always brought up the point of how he had all these records and he was really good into record keeping, and yet he never did provide any sort of evidence for being out of the area. You know, now there was the claim that, oh, well, the police took his stuff, so he didn't have the records. But my point is that, to me, I feel like there would have been something. You supposedly were out of state or out of town. You don't have any other way to prove it. He didn't touch on the stories of the victims at all. I mean, of course not, because according to this book, according to him, he's innocent. But he never even made up the excuse that for some of these people, there was never an excuse that he killed them in self-defense. I truly believe that Gacy knew the identities of all his victims, but unless confronted with the information, he wouldn't act like he would act like he didn't know. In his own book, he said that he kept the meticulous records, yet why wouldn't there be records of those he killed? He kept the items of some of the victims that were buried under the house. At least there were items at his house that belonged to the victims. Who knows where else some of the victims' belongings were? We already know that John Zick's car ended up with one of Gacy's guys. I believe that Gacy admitted to some of the truth if you read between the lines. In the book, he stated multiple times that he was out of town and out of state for the crimes. Personally, I think this alludes to two things. First, being that he may have killed people in various states. It's possible that he traveled and killed on the road. In fact, while I was reading this book on my channel, before finishing it, there was a, what is it called? Soft white underbelly interview with a survivor from one of Gacy's encounters. So, to me, I was like, yeah, I mean, I think that if he tried to kill or at least strangle somebody out of Illinois, like in that soft white underbelly interview, I don't have any reason to not believe he didn't kill while on the road, too. The second point is that him being away from Chicago alludes to there being other people involved with the crimes. The way I see it was that he was saying it without saying it, that Cram and Rossi had something to do with the crimes too. And that's not far-fetched to me. The book itself includes trial excerpts that had conversations with Rossi and Cram. It was pretty clear that the deals were made so they would get off scot-free, and Gacy would be made out to be the only guy. In some ways, yes, I agree with Gacy that there were more people involved than just him. It was even said in the book that Cram and Rossi would help bury the bodies under the crawl space. But I don't believe for a minute that they never knew what they were doing. They claimed to just dig under the crawl space and sprinkle lime down there because that's what Gacy told them to do. But it doesn't make sense to me that they had no idea what they were doing, or that something was wrong here. It doesn't make sense that as the victims accumulated and the smell grew, that they had no idea. From crime scene photos, it's clear that there was stuff buried down there. There's no way that Cram and Rossi didn't know something or somebody was buried under the house, decayed, and some of those people dying. That's pretty hard to say. The book actually said, it was in the transcripts, I believe. In the book, it says that some of the people buried under Gacy's house were not dead when they were buried. They were buried alive because not all the victims were dead when they went unconscious. They went unconscious and I guess awoke and they essentially, some of them had gagged to death on the socks or clothing that Gacy would have shoved into their throats. And that's horrifying within itself. There's a reason why Gacy paid his employees so handsomely. Cram and Rossi especially so. It was all hush money to keep quiet about how Gacy was sexually harassing his employees, and mostly to keep quiet about all of the messed up things that he would do. I see a huge similarity between Gacy and Dean Corll, where there was a middle aged man with two young guys, and the younger men would stake out and help kill victims. I believe that Cram and Rossi worked with Gacy to find victims, likely paid to do so. Were, were Cram and Rossi innocent? No, definitely not. Many people to this day are still in disbelief that they never had any legal consequences for their, well, accomplished, for their involvement with Gacy. It's insane to me that Gacy's legal defense was the insanity plea. It's just unbelievable that someone might have thought that was actually a good idea. Granted, I'm biased. I went to school for this kind of stuff. But in the book, Gacy acted like he knew that the insanity plea was bad off the bat. But I really doubt that. The way he wrote, Gacy came off like he knew the insanity plea was a bad idea now. You know, by the time, I guess, maybe 1988, or when they first started writing the book, I suppose. Or, you know, by 1993, he figured that that was not a very good play in court. But it did bring up the good point that it would mean Gacy would have to be insane 33 different times. I'm glad it brought that up because it pointed out, the book did point out that the insanity defense is terrible in the American legal system. It's just almost an instant loss. I don't know who thought of the defense, though, Gacy or Amirani. But if it was Gacy, I would say that he was a narcissistic fool for believing the insanity plea would work. And if it was Amirani, his lawyer, I'd assume that he chose to go that route because he actually knew it would get Gacy convicted. I think that Amirani knew Gacy was guilty. But I think he knew Gacy was guilty at first. You know, he already knew he was guilty. But it wasn't until he was in too deep that he realized how guilty Gacy was. You know what I mean? He knew it was bad, but he didn't know it was that bad. Supposedly, and I just say supposedly because a lot of people, things like Gacy and Manson, they get, I guess, contested in the mythos today, so to speak. But in some documentaries, some of the Chicago police say that Gacy's lawyers were afraid of him when they found out, like, Gacy either confessed or they assume he confessed everything to his lawyers. And supposedly when Gacy told his lawyers the truth, they were actually very frightened of him. The usage of the trial transcripts was, for me, it was a lot like a cop-out at the end. Instead of actually writing anything, pages upon pages of dialogue are copied and pasted in the final chapter. The transcripts bloat up the book to the point that the trial is half the size of the book. This is something that Reflection does too, if you might remember me reading that one by Lynette Fromme, where the final chapter, well, okay, it's not the final chapter, but it's the, the big one, so to speak. Like, Reflection technically had 14 chapters, but chapter 14 is like 2 pages, right? But anyway, the final chapter is the longest and makes up half the size of the book. I don't know what the full ending of the book is like, because like I said, mine is incomplete, just something that I had found on the internet. It just ends abruptly mid question in one of the transcripts, but I don't believe that in the full book Gacy admitted to any wrongdoing. As it pertains to a rare book, I'd say that A Question of Doubt is an interesting read for any true crime fan. This book allows you to see the world through Gacy's eyes, and as arrogant and narcissistic as they may be, or were. Like Susan Atkins and Tex Watson's books, Gacy refused to talk about the true details, the real details about what happened. John Wayne Gacy proves in his book that he was never sorry that he hurt anybody. He was only sorry that he got caught.